Welcome back to this very special Indianomics with Professor Kenneth Rogoff, from the Professor of Economics from Harvard University. Professor Rogoff, thank you very much for your patience and for staying on through the break. You quoted the Geeta Gopinath article, and you said that, when tariffs are raised in the United States, it's the US consumer who bears it, unlike the experience in other countries. Now, if there is a problem of inflation because of tariffs being raised, and there is a problem of job layoffs because the federal government has to be shrunk, is it not likely that the president, the US president, will pull back some of these? I mean, why would he want to shoot himself in the leg? Probably these are announcements and will not happen.
Who knows? I mean, I honestly have no idea what's going on in his head. I had assumed we were going to put tariffs in place. They were going to be lower than he claimed. He would negotiate it country by country, and we were going to sit with them. But I still think tariffs are going to happen. What's very disturbing is how random and unpredictable they are. Obviously, the president likes leveraging his power over other countries. The trouble is that he's creating chaos in the minds of American investors, people in the U.S. economy. I think an important point that people don't necessarily realize is that Donald Trump needed 51% of voters to get elected. But the other 49% are consumers, and they account for at least half of consumption. And I'll tell you, speaking to them, many of them are terrified. And so we're seeing a pullback on consumption. And I'm not sure the Trump voters are making up for the non-voter, the ones who voted against him, pulling back. So there's a real danger that this chaos triggers a collapse in consumption that obviously would be recessionary. I don't want to overstate the recession. You quoted Goldman Sachs at 20%. Oh, I would put it higher at this point of 30 or 35% at least. But it's not more likely than not. I mean, it's, I think, 1% growth by the end of the year is where I would peg things.
Okay. Yeah, that is definitely looking worried, because in the previous Trump presidency, the president seemed to respond to stock market signals fairly actively, and I would assume it'll be a matter of time he does it this time as well. But I take your point. But, my worry is more of the international order. Post-1945, we had some kind of a rules-based order with WTO and with similar tariffs for all countries by all countries. But now with the United States going and imposing different tariffs for China already, tariffs on China alone have increased. There is a bit of a chaos in terms of tariff imposition. Do you think it gets even worse as each country imposes a different tariff for United States and different tariff for others? You think it'll come to that?
It's hard to know how this is going to play out. And I'd say that about everything when we talk about the international order. Trump is shaking things up. We can look at the Middle East. We can look at Ukraine. We can look at South Asia. He's shaking things up. I hesitate to just say the worst case scenario is going to happen and we know how it's going to land. And I'd say the same thing with tariffs. But yes, I think it looks likely we're going to end up in a less globalized world. It's not a good thing. There are some legitimate national security issues. Let's not deny that. But I don't know what they have to do with Canada. Yeah, Canada should spend more on defense, but that doesn't seem to be what he's arguing about.
Fair point. No, I'll tell you the argument on the Indian side, especially with the automobile guys. The argument of zero tariff is seen as in favor of Tesla, so that Tesla cars can sell in India if India drops its tariffs down. But as Indian car makers point out, Tesla car would still not be competitive with Indian makers. But if the tariffs come down to zero, it's quite possible that Chinese cars will become very cheap in India. So the problem really that Indians are grappling with is, will the US go ahead when it will not even benefit Tesla? So that's why my question, will they still go for zero tariffs when it doesn't even benefit you, American business?
Well, you said, you answered what I was going to say as the question was unfolding, that Tesla is not going to win out in the long run. It's going to be the Chinese car makers. And the question is how much the world's going to shut them out. China's surplus as a share of its own GDP is much smaller than it was, say, in 2010 when it was practically double digits. But China's grown so much that its share of world GDP, its trade deficit, trade surplus, is just as big. And so the rest of the world's not going to be welcoming of this. I don't know it's going to play out blocking in Europe. We've already seen tariffs on electric vehicles. So, but I want to repeat the point that the country that imposes tariffs loses the most from tariffs. And I think that's been true of Brazil, that's been true of India, and it's soon going to be true of the United States. It's sad that the U.S. is doing this and setting such a bad example.
Yes, so at the moment I'm more worried about the economic problem, but I'm glad you brought up the non-economic aspects as well. Do you think that although President Trump came with the view that he's going to end wars, the fact that he's threatening to withdraw from the NATO, threatening to, and the whole global geopolitical divisions are rapidly changing. It at the moment looks like US and Russia are on the same side. So do you think actually the potential for war or conflict increases?
I don't. I mean, I think, first of all, every U.S. president now, going back into the 90s, has been arguing for Europe to pull its weight in defense. It's really a joke, the differential between the U.S. and Europe, and finding a way for Europe to contribute. I'm not sure this is the best way. And I think as the world has become less stable, let's face it, under the Biden presidency, it did become less stable. The U.S. has stretched and stretched in order to be able to cover 3 regions of the world. Yeah. And the U.S. would like Europe to be able to take care of its region. I don't know how fast that's going to unfold. I mean, I don't want to give you some Pollyannish view that we're going to have global peace over the next 4 years. It's very concerning, but I'm not sure the U.S. is the cause of this. Okay. Again, going back to the point I was making and, referring to my book, I think Donald Trump is an accelerant, perhaps, of these trends, but they were happening anyway and would have happened even if Harris had won the presidency.
Yeah, I take your point that the trends were already changing, but it just looks like the post-Second World War order that we saw the US as a global policeman and somehow being responsible for security everywhere is coming to an end, and we don't know what exactly will replace it. Professor Rogoff, just a final question on the dollar contradiction that seems to emanate from what President Trump is saying. On the one hand, he wants the dollar to be the international reserve currency. On the other, as we all know, the Triffin's paradox, unless the US runs a deficit, we cannot have dollar as the international currency. How do you think this contradiction will play out?
Well, I think there's, particularly with the US putting financial sanctions on everybody, there's quite an appetite for some diversification. I don't know for sure how that will play out. I do think the dollar has been falling. It's still pretty high. And Trump has said he wanted a weaker dollar. That was probably coming anyway. We probably will get that.
Okay. Just a final word, sir. Have you pondered on India at all? You have done several studies on India, but how do you see it emerging from this new world order?
Well, I think there's no question there's a lot of positive energy around India at the moment. For one thing, countries are diversifying away from China, and India has benefited a lot from this. The tariffs will hurt a bit, but India still has very strong capital spending, better growth than most emerging markets in the U.S. I don't see any reason for that not to continue. It's not helpful if the world slows down. But India has certainly been a bright spot in the global picture for the last couple of years. Okay.
It has been, we've been only listening to difficult things about the global economy. I'm glad we are at least ending on an optimistic note for India. Thank you very much, Professor Rogoff, for joining us and parsing the world order for us. Thank you very much for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Well, with that, we wrap up on this edition of Indianomics. Thanks much for watching.